All right, guys, we're back with Unruly. I am here today with Dr. Jess Carbino, a brilliant sociologist, relationship expert who has worked with Tinder and Bumble. She has been referred to as the Dr. Ruth of the swipe right generation, and we're so happy to have you here today.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
But yeah, I mean, we're here to talk about what dating, relationships, how all that is like going on nowadays. And there's been a lot of chatter about people dating less nowadays. From your understanding, what's going on with that?
So historically, people dated in order to form unions that were going to prosper their families. They were either land deals or economic deals. As the Industrial Revolution occurred, people started to partner more independently, although there were definitely other parties mediating it, whether it was parents, other institutions in their realm, like neighborhoods, churches, synagogues, etc. Today, partnerships have changed dramatically. You know, we don't have as much mediation from these institutions that historically connected us, like our friends, our family, etc. You know, we're connected by mediums and institutions that are technological, like dating apps primarily. That's the number one way individuals have met their romantic partners for the past 5 years. And I think that people want relationships. People are fundamentally lonely. If you examine all of the data out there, people do want relationships. The question is, how are they going about finding it and doing it? And we see that younger age groups, like Gen Z, for example, they're individuals who are either 13 or 14, depending on when they're measuring it, now to like age 27, whereas millennials are now approximately, 28 to 44. So millennials who are 28 to 44 are largely partnered. People within the Gen Z generation, a third of them aren't even like eligible to date from like an legal age perspective. So thinking about dating and relationship formation can be complicated, but we see people turning away from relationship formation in all contexts, like socially, and I think that this is just one other iteration of it.
That's really interesting. So do you think like the divestment from the dating culture is more prevalent in Gen Z then? Or is it just, I don't know. What do you think of that?
Sure. I think that Gen Z is trying to reimagine what relationships look like. I think that they're far more open to other types of relationships than generations prior, non-monogamous relationships. And also, I think that relationships historically have been based on these very discrete transitions to adulthood, like graduating from college, leaving the parental home, having all of these markers that were once attainable for people and have become increasingly unattainable for individuals. So individuals who don't necessarily have those markers to point to may feel less confident as being a dateable partner per se.
That's really interesting. I think to that point, a lot of things that happen from a sociological perspective in this country can be related back to the economy.
Sure.
Do you think that is affecting how people are approaching dating?
The economy absolutely affects how individuals approach dating. There is absolutely zero doubt about it. If you look at all of the data related to marriage rates, cohabitation rates, all of the decisions related to relationship formation are largely a function of the economy, and decisions thereafter as it relates to family formation are largely influenced by the economy. So no, I think that you can't extract the two. You know, it's interesting to think about it. A lot of sociologists and economists have thought about dating as a market in the same way individuals think about the job market, and they do a lot of models trying to understand the similarities between the two. But they're very different markets. Like with an economic model in the job market, you have more certainty. Like there's risk, but there's more certainty. You also don't like have an optimal wage like for a partner because those things are theoretically discrete. You know, how do you quantify emotional intelligence or that type of capacity? And also, what's really interesting is that like you're making this forecast about what somebody may be like in the future, whereas the job is a present job. You're accepting a present job value. Whereas in a partnership that's romantic in nature, you're forecasting about what will happen moving forward for years to come.
And that's somewhat different from, for example, in the Industrial Revolution age when we were, partnerships were created based on like creating a relationship between two families or to have financial security. You're seeing that that is less the case now, and that because of it, almost like those romantic notions are more important, or because of the economy, or less important?
So pre-industrial revolution, everything was about like land, monetary, etc. Post-industrial revolution, because we weren't as tied to the land, we were able to make a bit more of a free choice on the basis of romantic love. That doesn't mean, however, that families and other institutions didn't still largely mediate it, because there was still a great deal of dependence individuals had on these institutions, which doesn't exist in the same way that it does now. So economics has always been the through line, and it continues to be the through line because people have to be able to create households, and individuals' perception of whether or not someone is a good partner or a good mate is largely tied to their economic status. So I think that all of these things have been there. It just depends on what iteration or how economics may have looked depending on the time period. Romantic love, however, became more operative over time because people were less tied to those institutions that historically have connected us. At the same time, though, I think that we've surpassed this idea of just romantic love is like, I love this person, I feel like we're a good couple, to now this all-fulfilling relationship that many other social scientists have talked about, whereby we expect our spouse or our boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, what have you, to fulfill every single need that we have, whether it's spiritual, sexual, emotional, etc. And then we find them deficient in some way if they're not able to do that. But at the same time, ironically even, we were reliant on those other institutions to provide us with those sources of support historically, like educational institutions, religious institutions, familial institutions, neighborhoods. We were able to get support and feel fulfilled through those other mechanisms, but now we don't, and we have to rely on our partners more, or we believe we need to rely on our partners more.
So there's like a dependency on that partner that
Correct.
was previously spread out amongst other groups, but is now very like centralized on your romantic partner potentially.
My poor husband.
We'll pour one out for him.
Okay. Whiskey is his drink of choice, or martini.
You know what? I bet we have some of that in the office.
Okay, great.
We'll make a whole ceremony of it later.
Okay, great.
And do let him know.
Okay.
To all of those points, wonderful points you just made. I guess one thing interesting to me is when you were talking about, again, like the forming of families, forming of these, I guess, entities, like that being kind of further along in the dating process. But if you think about dating now, even just like jumping into dating is expensive. I mean, with the economy going on, like, do we want to go on these dates and blow dinner and drinks on like someone who we don't like inevitably? Like, I think that's what's interesting to me is, of course, like once we get later on in these relationships, like that's where a lot of finance comes in. But this is just like the first step, and people aren't even seeming to be wanting to do that.
Sure. I imagine economics certainly do come into play. I know that from the data.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to think about, what does a first date look like? I don't think, from the data I've seen, the overwhelming majority of individuals are not going to dinner and drinks on a first date. They're largely going to drinks or coffee. And I think that's the way to consider it in a more economical way. And women have to think about other things like getting their hair done, their nails done, dry cleaning for both men and women. These are all real considerations. So I've long proposed that people try to stack dates on the same evening.
I've heard you speak about this before,
yes.
And I love that concept.
Because that way you are economizing. You're wearing the same outfit. You are doing your hair and makeup once, and you can also go out that same night with friends if the dates don't end up working out. But if they do, you can stay on the last date. And moreover, you know, if you are going on multiple dates a night, you can drink seltzer water. And you know, seltzer water is a perfectly acceptable beverage. And if you're having a good time, order alcohol if you drink alcohol, or order a mocktail if you want to stay and enjoy yourself. And then invest more as you're learning more about the person.
One thing that brings me pause is that I think about all the things I've achieved as an individual and how that can't stack up against potentially this gold standard of being married. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like, I mean, I feel like I have friends getting engaged. I have friends potentially making down payments on houses. And I think marriage is maybe with within that kind of same group of life moments and how those feel far off and unattainable in some ways. And so it's like, if that is the gold standard and it doesn't feel attainable, how are you supposed to kind of soldier on?
Well, I think you're speaking to something really interesting here, which is related to our identities. And you're speaking about your identity as an individual and all the things that you've accomplished independently, whereas marriage is often thought about as a joint accomplishment, or is it an individual accomplishment, trying to think about it in that way. And the fact of the matter is it doesn't detract from all of those other accomplishments, which is interesting to consider in light of the fact that you see women largely keeping their names at higher rates than they have historically.
I absolutely want to do that.
I have done that.
And you should, doctor.
Oh, thank you. Well, I got it before I met him. Or well,
Exactly.
no, I got it before we married. Sorry, I had met him before that, a year before. But I think what's largely interesting to consider here is that among all groups, and we can get back to all of these issues, but among all groups, socioeconomic, racial, etc., they laud marriage because it's considered a covenant of sorts, whether it's legal, religious, what have you, and it's something that is perceived as being a promise, something that's supposed to be forever, despite the fact that we have a lot of data saying that it isn't always forever. Although I must say divorce rates have been stabilized for quite some time, since the 80s. We've observed that. But at the same time, if individuals feel like they can't attain a marriage that is stable and believe that the partners whom they are living with, having children with, etc., are not capable of doing so, they might partner, but they may not marry, which is why you see these disparate rates of marriage among individuals who are more educated and wealthier relative to individuals who aren't as wealthy, because they don't want to be married to individuals who they don't deem to be marriageable by virtue of all of these economic markers.
That makes a lot of sense. How does that trickle down to again, what I mentioned earlier? How does that trickle down to the very beginning, even with dating? Or do you think that comes into play later?
Well, I think that individuals who are not in a place where they feel as though they are marriageable or desirable on an economic basis, they're sitting it out. They're staying out of the market. They don't perceive themselves to be marriageable. They don't perceive themselves to be interesting. They don't perceive themselves as being desirable. But the overwhelming majority of the population isn't at the level socioeconomically or educationally of the individuals we observe marrying at later ages. So I think that people are removing themselves from the playing field without having a real understanding of the fact that partnership can look different. Moreover, it's about rethinking what is it that needs to be there for marriage to exist. Do you need to have the capacity to purchase a home? Do you need the capacity to do all these things? Obviously, ideally you will have the capacity if you choose to have children to support them economically. That would be a decision that people would consider very much so. But the idea of getting married legally and just living together, do you need all the other bells and whistles to be able to make that happen? Is a question. It's an open one. And I think it remains to be seen, but the direction certainly suggests that until individuals feel like they have achieved the markers of adulthood that have historically been associated with marriage and desirability as it relates to being a romantic partner, they're not comfortable doing that. So I'm wondering if people are going to start rethinking this as people age. Or, for example, we see home ownership rates have declined dramatically. People are still marrying. They're not buying homes. They're renting, or they're delaying home purchases. So I guess the question is, are we going to start rethinking all of these other markers as people are starting to develop new markers of adulthood? And there's a lot going on in the literature psychologically about emerging adulthood and how people think about young adulthood and emerging adulthood differently because they can achieve those markers financially or materially.
Carrying on from that, these new markers you mentioned.
Yes.
What do those look like? And if those continue to be invested in or idolized as these new markers are something that we care about, do you think people will emerge and get themselves back into the market, so to speak?
Well, they're largely emotional in nature, and also relate to responsibility, because even if individuals are not able to financially differentiate themselves from their parents, they are able to individuate in certain ways, like being able to not rely on their parents for the same type of encouragement and support as they had historically. Like as a child, for example, they still can look to families. They also can be able to have experiences that are far and apart from potentially achieving jobs or what have you. For example, experiences of discovery. These are largely things that are seen as part of adulthood or young adulthood, self-discovery and exploration, and encouraging people to not be as tied to these markers of achievement, but rather markers more of exploration. And I think that does fit into dating because, frankly, the only way individuals learn about dating is by doing it. Like it's really challenging.
That's a really good point.
To find a partnership and to know what you want in a partnership without doing it.
And you mentioned again these like markers of exploration, and those to me sound different than kind of the traditional markers, which do seem to have like a financial component.
Yes.
Do you have like a little bit more, can you get a little bit more specific about what the markers of exploration might be? I know you mentioned like potentially like being independent. Individuation
From families, absolutely. And also internally figuring out who you are, absolutely. And I think it's especially relevant because if you are interested at all in like psychodynamic literature, which is about trying to understand who we are in the context of families and how that shows up in our future relationships as couples, the individual issues that you have in your families of origin are the same individuals' issues that you are going to struggle with as an individual in a couple. So the issues that you had to deal with your parents are the same issues that are going to show up in that future relationship with your spouse or your partner. And you're only going to be as healthy or as able to grapple with those things as you are able to grapple with your family of origin original issues unless you've addressed it in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
We all have our signature issues.
Yeah. I'm thinking of mine right now.
Oh, yeah. I'm happy to say it.
Well, it is funny. Like, that is one thing that I think I've noticed, again, in my own relationship. I've been in a relationship for 8 years now, and I feel like having that space between this idea of marriage and not keeping my distance, but letting myself grow as an individual before that happened really helped shape me in general. And I think eventually helped shape relationships, like the relationship I'm in. But then also I think about like my sister who got married when she was quite young. And do you think that people waiting to dive into those like serious committed relationships is affecting marriage and its stability because people know themselves better?
I think you're asking an important question of like, by delaying it, do you know yourself better? I think that yes, you do. But also I think that in marriage, it is one of the best opportunities to grow. Because I do believe the person you marry can help you complete your psychological arc. As I mentioned, the issues you have as a child with your parents are going to show up and be the issues that you have in your relationship with your spouse or partner. And the capacity to work through those issues with your spouse in this relationship or your partner in this relationship can be developmentally and psychologically really meaningful. And I think that growth happens ideally over the life course, and it doesn't just happen, between moving out and ultimately partnering. There's so much that happens after that's important to consider as well. But I do think it's important to know yourself and who you are and what you want before entering into it. It doesn't mean that you should delay everything, and I think people often use that excuse, like, I need to go find myself. I don't think that's true. I think you find yourself through life along the way. You're always learning. I mean, ideally that you're always learning and that your partner teaches you something.
So one of the things we talked about was if the economy sucks and dating also sort of sucks, we have to redefine how we form families and how we even define relationship milestones. So in the spirit, I guess, of emphasizing what's actually exciting about dating right now, what is exciting about these redefinitions?
I think to me what could theoretically be exciting about these redefinitions is the role of the individual within these institutions. So historically we've thought about marriage and relationships as being about the identities of two people being combined into like one joint identity. And obviously partnerships are around one identity, which is why uncoupling is so challenging for people, because they are merging their identities in a way.
It's the we.
It's the we. And I don't think that forming new partnerships will in any way become inhibited by that. I think that we are still going to have we's. But I think about if we are delaying marriage, if we are delaying partnership, it does provide an opportunity for a higher degree of individuation. Does it provide people with an enhanced chance of thinking more about who they are and what they want prior to entering these partnerships? Moreover, does it make them invest in other areas of their life, socially, religiously, familially, that have historically, or at least over the last 50 years, have been neglected? We know that individuals do not have many close confidants. Perhaps delaying these markers of adulthood will lead individuals to feel and turn inward towards their friend communities or their spiritual communities in a way that they may not have historically, because they were moving at a pace or in a direction that was different.
Do you think that there's something in particular that, I guess, just simply put, straight couples can learn from queer relationships?
Of course.
In terms of, like, the dating process.
In terms of the dating process. Well, I mean, I think what's interesting is to think about, for example, in the lesbian community, for example, sociologists have long talked about how lesbians partner relatively quickly compared to their straight counterparts. Mm-hmm. I think that's something interesting to think about. Like, what does it mean to partner more quickly and to commit within a couple more quickly? I think these are all important things to consider. Also, egalitarianism within queer couples relative to straight couples. You know, a lot of the literature bears out that once people marry and have children, that queer couples and straight couples look more similar in terms of the division of labor within their home. Mm-hmm. And so does that lead to this question that we've been talking about as it relates to like economic efficiency and this sort of trading model? I think that straight couples can learn a lot from queer couples as it relates to these ideas related to egalitarianism.
I mean, again, I feel like I know a lot of successful relationships that have started in the apps, mine being one of them.
Mine too.
I do still feel like there's like an anti-app sentiment growing.
Sure.
And what do you think is behind the growing fatigue there?
Oh, I can tell you in 1 second. Sentence. People always haven't liked dating. People have always not liked dating. Dating has never been easy. Whether it was, you know, Elizabeth Bennet, or now, you know, you and me, or a single person out there. Dating has always been frustrating.
Cut the show. We're done.
We have the answer. That's it. We're done. That's it. Over. Kaput. No, but dating has always been frustrating. It's just that the mediator has changed. It's no longer, you know, your Aunt Nancy coordinating it or trying to find somebody in a bar. Now you're in control per se, but it's a very depersonalized way of doing it to a certain degree, because it's your phone. It's on the screen and you were alone while doing it, versus sitting in a bar with a group of girlfriends or a group of men and women friends and like saying, well, he's cute or she's cute. It's a completely different dynamic. It is a lot harder today to blame your Aunt Nancy for not setting you up with people when she was responsible historically. And historically it would have been challenging to blame her as well, because, you know, Aunt Nancy is not principally responsible for doing that for you.
Everyone lay off Nancy.
Lay off Nancy, please. But today it's easy to say the apps suck. They don't, in my opinion, but it's easy to say the apps suck. It's a lot harder to say your Aunt Nancy sucks. So I think that's really what it comes down to. Fundamentally, it is a depersonalized way of finding someone, and the onus is largely on you, and you're removed from other social institutions. There are institutions mediating. It's just technological, not interpersonal.
Mm-hmm. So if dating sucks and the economy sucks, and dating and the economy are quite related, what do we do?
We keep dating and we rethink partnership and we think about what does it mean to form families in a new economy? What does it mean to form partnerships in a new economy? And it is related to these broader issues, moreover, about occupational attainment and home ownership. I mean, these are all heavily linked, and there are a lot of people questioning these things, and I think that we'll have to continue to question these things together. But if we are continuing to look at these very historically relevant models of what is desirable, it may not necessarily be as germane anymore.
To the point of what you just mentioned of like, it's much easier to blame
Tinder or Bumble than your Aunt Nancy.
Yes. What is something you would say to someone who is feeling sour about the apps? Like, what's something that you could say to them just to make them just reposition your thinking on it? Maybe.
You can't win if you don't play.
That's good.
I really believe that. My grandmother said that to me. You cannot win if you don't play. Like, if you do not put yourself out there, you're not going to find somebody just sitting alone in your room. You're not going to find somebody, never entering the space. You have to put yourself into the arena. You have to enter the market to be eligible, to be at risk, as a demographer would say. To be in the analysis of, like, your likelihood of matching with somebody, you have to actually participate in order to be able to find somebody.
One thing that I had listened to another interview you had done on a podcast a couple years ago, and I really liked what you said about you have to take a risk on your profile. You can't just look exactly like everyone else, because then what is making you stand out?
It's true.
What do you think this interview I think was in 2018. Do you think that's still very much true?
I think it's absolutely relevant. I think that we're all very much concerned about standing out and differentiating ourselves because we are worried about seeming as desirable to as many people as possible, with the fear that those matches that may be relevant to us may be turned off if we take a risk, even if we are potentially a good match. So by remaining as sanitized as possible in terms of our profiles, we're not actually attracting the people whom we want to attract, and we're not distinguishing ourselves from everybody else, so we just seem irrelevant in a way.
And then one thing I wanted to ask you is, through your experience, again, working at Tinder, working at Bumble,
Sure.
the doctorate you're now pursuing.
Yeah.
What is a polite way, and do you have advice to essentially tell people to kind of fuck off when they start asking around why you're dating, why you're not dating? Are you getting married? Are you not ever getting married at all? What's something to say to just shut that down?
Who's asking? I think that's part of it.
Okay.
I think that is part of it because their motivations are different. One general question is, like, depending on who they are, the real question is, what is it about you that makes you want to ask me this question? That's really what it comes down to. What is driving you to ask me this question? If the person is your mother, your grandmother, your parents, it may be coming from a place of genuine concern. Like, if you are in your mid-40s and you're not married and you really want to be married, for example, and your parents said, like, how's it going? Are you dating? It's probably coming from a place of genuine concern. If it's some random lady on the street who's saying, you're cute, why aren't you dating somebody? It's a very different response. For the lady on the street, be like, that's a pretty odd thing to do. But I
like
think
a coworker.
A coworker. I would ask them, frankly, tell me why you're curious to know that. Ask them. Tell me why you're curious to know that. I'm happy to answer you, but I'd really love to know what makes you want to ask me that question. It's what I'd say to a patient of mine if they asked me something that was deeply personal.
I actually think it's a lot easier to answer when it is your coworker, or it is someone on the street, because you're like, you don't really need to know, you know what I mean? But then it is a harder answer when it's to someone you care about and you know that they care. And then also that they might not like the answer. Because the answer is just not right now.
No, and I think that's really, it's hard to have these conversations. But moreover, I think it relates back to one of the first questions you asked me about, like, the stakes associated with dating and marriage historically and how it's evolved over time. Like, historically, your family and friends and coworkers had a stake in who you married. There was curiosity. There was management of it. They were the mediating forces. Now they're not the mediators in the same way, but they still feel invested in a way. And that's where I think this tension is really coming into play in a meaningful way.
Wow, this is like a free therapy session.
My pleasure.
I have to tell my therapist that now too. I'm like,
good.
well, we don't have to talk about relationships this week, so.
Okay, skip it. Move on to something else.
What is the most unruly thing you've done this week?
I sent a text message to somebody asking them something that was what I perceived to be a breach of social protocol. And I sent it to them and I called them out in a way that was kind, firm, and very direct. And I thought it was unruly because women often are not allowed or perceived as being allowed to engage in direct conversations with other women when there are breaches of social protocol. And I felt really good because I was kind. I started out from a place of curiosity, but I was very direct and firm, and I told them that I believed that they were interfering in a private matter that should not have been interfered with.
I love that, and that has actually helped me reframe a scary email I sent the other day.
Oh, good!
I'm like, that people did not react as well to, even though I was just being direct. So maybe it's just being unruly, and I don't mind being a little unruly sometimes.
Make good trouble, as John Lewis said. Make good trouble.
That's a good point.
Make good trouble.
Okay, so we play this little game called ... where I'll give you a little prompt, and then you finish the sentence.
I love it. This
Okay.
is great.
Biggest red flag to look out for on a date?
Impolite. The person is impolite.
That's actually, yeah. That would do it for me. Biggest green flag?
The person is a good listener.
Best way to romantically meet someone in real life? This can just be your opinion. It doesn't have to be a scientific fact.
Through your Aunt Nancy.
Fair. The best meet cute you ever heard of was?
Oh, God. My parents.
What was theirs?
My mom is a twin, and my dad and my aunt were working together, and my aunt was married, and my father brought my aunt, they were close friends, and he brought her flowers for her birthday, and she said, oh, my sister's going to be so jealous, and he said, why would she be jealous? He didn't know she was a twin, and she said, oh, she's my twin. They were doing business together in the garment district, and she said, oh, my sister's a twin. He's like, I have to meet her. I really, they were friends for a long time. He's like, I had no idea you were a twin. They met through my aunt, and they went on a date. My dad says he was blind, and my mom says she was absolutely blind, and they got married 6 months later. They've been married for 41 years almost.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everyone take note.
Yes. They've had their share of issues. Who hasn't? But
For real.
It's a cute meet cute.
Okay. The best take that Gen Z has on dating, in your opinion?
They seem really invested in getting to know themselves. They seem to be. I don't know how the data will be borne out over time, but they seem really curious about knowing themselves and being aware of who they are when dating. And I think that's something laudable.
Okay, and then the best way to kindly reject someone you're not feeling?
I really enjoyed getting to know you, but I don't believe that we're a match, and I wish you the best of luck.
Those are all of our questions. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
This was absolutely fascinating. Like I said, I got my little bit of free therapy in.
Same here.
I could probably skip my session on Friday. So
Okay, great.
Telling my therapist expecting an email to cancel.
Amazing. My pleasure. It's really nice.